Do you ever think about these guys, these absolute warriors, putting their body on the line and flourishing later and later into their careers, almost impervious to injury or slowing down? Rugby is one of the most aggressive field sports in the world. So, how are we getting older and older players continuing to excel later in their careers, even as the sport gets more and more physical? How are they doing it? So, rugby has got one of the highest injury rates per hour in any sport, professional or amateur, underage and senior. It's attritional, truly. More than 1 in 4 players will experience an injury over the course of a single season, and in many cases the rates will be far higher depending on the level you're playing at. So how are these players able to succeed later into their careers? Well, here are the reasons why. Firstly, the standard of strength and conditioning work we're seeing now is vastly improved. Rugby has some of the greatest minds in strength and conditioning. They're well paid, highly educated, work as part of multidisciplinary teams, and most importantly, they're held in high esteem by the rest of the coaching staff. But why does this matter? Well, I think a few of these things are pretty obvious, right? Pay peanuts, get monkeys. Pay well, you get Aled Walters or Nick Gill coaching your team. Next, you combine these experts with the geniuses in your sports medicine department and you get well-refined and drastically condensed rehab and prehab work. And most importantly, your entire team from surgeon, nutritionist, S&C coaches, sports masseuses, all know what the plan is. How many times have you or someone you know had an injury where the doctor tells them to get an MRI, then the physio tells them to do some rehab work, maybe a physical therapist tells them to take a break from the sport, and then your coach tells you to strap up and get on with it and play the game? Everyone needs to be pulling in the same direction, and only then can we start to see these kind of phenomenal outcomes. So why is it so important that the head coaches care about S&C, aside from the obvious one I've just mentioned? Well, this gives much more scope to the S&C staff to actually push for major physiological changes in the player group. If the coaches only care about the rugby, they push for players to be fresher and fresher for every session. They take more time on the field and in team meetings and ultimately limit the ceiling of athletic development in the player group. So you might be listening to this wondering, why now though? We've always had big, strong players. They've always lifted weights. What's different now? Well, to be honest with you, there were big players, there were strong players, and they were freaks. But in most teams, they were just that. So freaks in 1 or 2 areas, maybe not that impactful in the rest of play. Look at some of the freaks from the older generations, to give Bastro, Cheval, Jonah Lomu. These guys were freaks, absolutely phenomenal. But would they be as impactful today? Maybe, right? It's highly likely they might get tackled more effectively though. They might be moved around the field a bit more so it wouldn't be as impactful later in the games. And they might find it difficult to keep up with the amount of games per season at the top level. They certainly wouldn't be putting in performances like, let's say, Andrew Porter, where you're playing over 80% of total minutes available for the international team and having massive impacts in open play as well as in set play. What it is nowadays everyone is a freak. Everyone is pushing heavier weights, faster sprint times, and spending much less time on the ground in between phases. We also rarely see top teams relying on those 1 or 2 players for their big impact. It's very likely that many players in the previous generations left the game early due to the sheer physical toll on their body. So they weren't being physically developed sufficiently. In many cases, they were relying on their genetic talents and predispositions to get them to the level they were at, but not really pushing too far beyond that. It was much more a system of talent identification and getting vast numbers of players through, rather than nurturing and developing the talent that's in front of them. So what do we see now? We now see players making huge leaps and bounds later in their career. So in their own games, in their physical, psychological and tactical development, it goes later and later. Think about Bundy Aki, amazing development in his 28th and 29th year. Same thing for Gibson Park. These guys were great players before, but they weren't at the same level they're at now. And especially as they're approaching 30 years old, we see drastic improvements. Undoubtedly coaching, right? So tactical, physical, psychological, coaching are all having a huge influence over these guys getting better and better as they age. The S&C work is undeniable, and I want you to look at this to illustrate my point more clearly. So let's say you're an academy level 20-year-old front row. You're coming out of the academy with a 250 kilo squat, 180 kilo bench press, and you weigh about 120 kilos. For argument's sake, let's say you play until you're 34. During that time, you'll probably have 3 or 4 major injuries. If you have great S&C staff and you look after your end of the bargain, you can probably hope to achieve results somewhat similar to this. So in your early 20s, you've hit some good strength numbers. You're strong, powerful, and impactful. You should notice a couple of things about this graph. So first is the body weight. Most players will fluctuate their body weight over the course of their career in order to find what works best for them and the style of play their team wants. Second thing is the amount of variation over the course of their career. In fact, these lines have been curved out for the ease of viewing, but in reality, their squat numbers, bench numbers, and body weight numbers look much closer to this. The drops in strength correlating with the return to in-season training, the vast drop-offs over the time where injuries might occur, and the aggressive peaks in the off-season accumulation periods. Now, in my opinion, one of the key differences is that players now have these super effective means of reliably gaining strength and power in the off-season and downtimes. Rather than heading to the beach for a couple of weeks, then hitting up the local powerlifting club for a few weeks of box squats and a handful of D-ball, modern players have highly structured off-seasons with well-structured athletic development plans. The second reason players are lasting longer is undeniably down to the improvements in recovery protocols. Managing stress in season is no small task. You're trying to balance the use of anti-inflammatory interventions to make sure you're still getting a good adaptation effect while also making sure you're ready to go and train the next day. So this is using ice baths, compression boots, all of these things which commonly are referred to as recovery tools, but it's very important they're used effectively and at the right times so we don't limit the ultimate adaptation that might occur. Also allowing players to have rest periods during the high load weeks, bringing in their families to allow for less psychological disruption. The list goes on and on. Now, it's remiss of me to mention recovery without talking about the dark side of pro recovery agents. And sure, they're getting better year on year as well, and they're being effectively leveraged by many countries, teams and players. But there's more to it than just screaming steroids and leaving it at that. Finally, I think many players are lasting in their careers because the sport is being forced to change. There's a massive emphasis being put on the brain and neck health of players, limiting the amount of concussive episodes a player can endure per season, lowering tackle heights to lessen the risk of head contact, making the gator roll illegal. All of these things are lessening the amount of career-ending injuries. You're thinking about people like Felix Jones, who have 2 major neck injuries and they're gone from the sport as a player forever. When you're towards the tail end of your career, you're starting to slow down a bit. One major head contact or neck injury can definitely be a major catalyst to starting to think about hanging up your boots. So what does this mean for you? Well, here's my top 5 tips for a longer career. At number 5, we have recovery, prehab, rehab, and general injury prevention. This is invaluable. Find a good physio and work with them as often as possible. Chase down any loose ends, any niggly injuries and restricted movement patterns. Your body will thank you for it. Up next, at number 4, is to find your ideal body weight. Don't be afraid to drop down. Don't be afraid to build up a few times. Think about how you feel on the field, how easily you can recover post-playing, and how confident and powerful you feel at each of those body weights. There's a lesser known practice of periodizing your body weight over the course of a season, which is great and actually will give you multiple touch points with each body weight, so that's definitely something you could look at. Okay, number 3 is to think about progression in terms of years rather than progression in terms of months or by the end of this season. I regularly have consultations with younger players that are super interested in what they can achieve by the end of this year. but you should be looking at what kind of unit you can become over the course of maybe 5 or 10 years and what that will mean for your career as a senior player between the ages of 25 and 35. Right, second last is to make the most of the injured period. If you play rugby, you will have injuries. It might be 4 months off for a shoulder surgery, a couple of months off for a broken arm, or a few weeks off for a smashed nose. No matter what it is, make the most out of this period. You saw the graph earlier, you saw those vast upswings in strength numbers. Many of those correlated not with an off season, but with a period where the player themselves is injured and they get more time in the gym. If you can move anything, then get into the gym and push whatever it is available as hard as possible and make some adaptations. Finally then, work your ass off in the gym. Whether it's in season or off season, you need to be forcing adaptation. You shouldn't ever be thinking about just getting back in shape. You need to be looking far beyond that. Think about driving yourself to a place you've never been before. Getting crazy strong and powerful is simple, right? It's not easy by any means, but it is simple. You just do the program, get the sessions done, and the results will be there for you at the end of it. If you want more information like this, please sign up to the Sika Strength newsletter, select sports S&C and whatever other topics you might be interested in. And if you want in-season or off-season rugby programs or general S&C programs, check out the Sika Strength app.